I'm going to digress for a moment in order to answer a very important question. In my former metaphysical training, we were told not to specifically treat anyone unless they asked for it, that it hurried them along too fast spiritually, like dragging a child by the arm. Well, there were other reasons too, but that would be absolutely the right procedure if you were working in the mental realm. In other words, you have no more right to enter a person's mental household uninvited than you have to enter their home. Each person should be permitted to maintain the integrity of their own mind, of their own body, of their own home, of their own supply, without anyone in any wise intruding uninvited. Now, if a person is ill, and for all you know they are depending upon materia medica, you have absolutely no right to try to heal them by your means, any more than if you were ill and were relying on spiritual means, that you would want somebody to stuff medicine in your mouth or take advantage of your being unconscious to otherwise medicate you. You wouldn't want that because you have determined on your way of life. And in some cases, even to the extent that you would rather pass from this scene under your own type of help than to remain here, and I have known many cases like that, under medication or surgery. Now, to give a person a treatment means that you are entering their mental household, and you are interfering with their mental processes, probably even disturbing them. You have no right to do that. And therefore, if you are working from a mental standpoint of giving treatments to people, don't do it unless you are invited to do it. It is not your right. But as long as you are following the teaching of the infinite way, you will never give anyone a treatment. Not only uninvited, but not even if you're invited, because we do not give treatments to anyone. Never, under any circumstance, do we give treatments to anyone, even if they should ask for it. Why? That is not the procedure of the healing principle of the infinite way. The message of the infinite way teaches this: if I am the practitioner, I must know the truth. If I do not know the truth, I have no right to be a practitioner. Now, if I know the truth, then it makes no difference where I am or under what circumstances. The moment I witness a lie, I correct it within myself. Therefore, if I see a person who is ill, I don't give them a treatment. Not even my patients, I don't give a treatment. When my attention is called to their illness, I turn within myself for a realization of the truth. Now, what is the truth? God constitutes individual being. God is your being. Your soul, your mind, and even your body is the temple of God. I'm not saying this to you. I'm not giving you a treatment. I am repeating this to myself. This is the truth that I am knowing. But it isn't only the truth about you. It's a universal truth. The only reason I'm even reminding myself of it is that there is an appearance to the contrary. And I correct that within myself, the same as if I saw a big sign saying 2 times 2 are 5, I would inwardly say, no, it's 4. I didn't give a treatment to the 5 or to the sign. I corrected this appearance within myself. Now, you ask for help or you don't ask for help. It makes no difference to me. If I witness the discord or inharmony, my inner reaction is that God constitutes individual being, therefore all being is perfect, spiritual, and intact, and this appearance that faces me is this carnal mind, which isn't mind and which has no law, no cause, no effect, no avenue of operation, no channel of expression. And then I'm through. Actually, at this stage of my work, I don't go that far because it isn't necessary. I have been doing this for 30 years. So that now, when I behold an appearance of error, to me it is just an evidence of malpractice. That's all it is. It's just a mental imposition touching my thought, and I don't accept it, and that's the end of it. In the ordinary case, if there is not a response, and I'm speaking now of those people who appeal to me for help, if that does not result in the healing and they come back again for help, then I may have to sit down, remind myself of this, get quiet, and wait for that click. But I'm not suggesting this to you as a mode of treatment, because you won't succeed with it until you're at that stage when it's absolutely apparent to you that the discords that touch us aren't really conditions or people. They are just this universal malpractice. Your procedure must be, whether or not you are called upon for help, to remind yourself that God constitutes individual being, and God is eternal, even as individual being, and immortal and perfect. And then remember that any phase or facet of discord, any appearance that touches you, is nothing more or less than a picture sent out by this carnal mind. And you know what the carnal mind is? It isn't really a mind. It's a belief in 2 powers. There is no carnal mind anywhere around the individual who does not have 2 powers. So that all there is to the evils of this world is the belief in 2 powers. That's what sent Adam and Eve out of Eden, accepting the powers of good and of evil. And there aren't such things. There is only good. Now, because of this human existence, we're eternally being faced with sin, disease, death, lack, limitation, wars, and man's inhumanity to man. But actually, these are not evil conditions. These are the mental impositions that strike your thought. And that's why, if you battle them or fight them, you lose. That is why, if you struggle with our treatments, you can't win your case. Our treatments are based on resist not evil, thou couldst have no power over me unless it came from the Father, put up thy sword. And we do not fight error, nor do we use truth to overcome error, nor do we use God to heal disease. Our entire recognition is that so far as God is concerned, his universe is perfect, eternal, and harmonious, and what we are being confronted with is that we're seeing this perfect universe through a glass darkly, instead of face to face. Therefore, we're not dealing with powers to be overcome. We are dealing only with a negative appearance that has to be recognized as such and nothingized in that way. That is why I've said to you, I can only teach this to you after you have a sufficient background of the writings as to be able to accept it. To the human mind, uninstructed in our message, this that I am saying is absolute nonsense, and no one knows it better than I do. I can well remember my very first experience when we had just received a cable from England that my father was dying. He had been 77 days in a hospital, had surgery, and finally the cable came, send for the body. It was in the First World War, and I immediately arranged for my mother to go over and get his body, because that was the nature of the cable. That evening I had an appointment with a girl for dinner and called for her at her home, and her father was visiting there, and I was introduced to him. Well, sitting there for a few moments, I mentioned that I had put my mother on the steamer that afternoon to go to Europe to bring back my father's body. And this man said, is your father dead? Oh, I said, no, but he must be dying, or he may be dead by now. I told him what the cable was. Oh, he said, no, you're a young man, and your father must be a very young man. He doesn't have to die. That was strange language to me. I said, he doesn't have to die. The doctors say so. He's been 77 days in a hospital. Well, have you never heard of prayer and prayer healing? No, the only prayer I know is, now I lay me down to sleep. So he looked at me, and that was a very strange thing. Then I said, oh, do you mean Christian Science? He said, yes. Oh, that mind over matter, I've read about that in the paper. Well, you don't really think that would help anybody, do you? He said, well, I'm a Christian Science practitioner. I do believe it. But now, you know how that must have struck me out of the blue. But I said, well, if you can help him, of course, it'd be a marvelous thing if he could come home. When my mother landed in England, my father was up and dressed and ready to come home. And for 25 years, my father never knew a day of illness. Never. Never. And if he had a cold or one of these slight things, he could just pick up the book and read a few pages, and he was healed. So I know, of course, he didn't try to explain the principle to me, or probably I wouldn't have even asked him to help my father. I thought he really was just going to pray to God, and if he was holy enough, maybe God would answer him. And so I know how foolish this must all sound to a person who hasn't a background of infinite way writings. Not even those who have New Thought or Christian Science can completely understand what I say unless they have a background of the infinite way. Because this principle is not mind over matter, nor is it the power of God to heal disease, nor is it the power of truth over error. It is none of those things. This is a direct real revelation that was somehow unfolded within me, that ye need not fight. There is no power in this devil, this impersonal source of discord. It is the fighting of it that perpetuates it. That was the revelation given me, just as the nature of God has been given me in revelation in a different way than you will ever find it in any writings on earth. A God that you do not have to pray to, and a God who wouldn't answer your prayers if you did pray. A God who is always being God and doesn't have to be reminded of it by man. A God who is the infinite intelligence of this universe and whom man cannot instruct, nor can man influence. And therefore, this whole teaching is not a turning to God, that God should do something. It is a turning to God to be in God consciousness where nothing needs to be done. That is where this message differs from any of the religious approaches on the face of the earth. Now, if you ask me, do we pray? Of course, my books are full of it. Prayer is our major mode of life. Prayer is something that I am personally doing almost all of my waking hours and many of my sleeping hours, because I know how to live inside of me and maintain a contact of prayer. But a prayer that is known only, or mode of prayer known only to the mystics. I will show you my idea of prayer as expressed by Dr. Alexis Carrel in his book, Man the Unknown. Prayer should be understood not as a mere mechanical recitation of formulas, but as a mystical elevation, an absorption of consciousness in the contemplation of a principle both permeating and transcending our world. Such a psychological state is not intellectual. It is incomprehensible to philosophers and scientists, and inaccessible to them. But the simple seem to feel God as easily as the heat of the sun or the kindness of a friend. The prayer which is followed by organic effects is of a special nature. First, it is entirely disinterested. See what I said before about you can't use prayer or God for selfish, personal, or destructive things. Man offers himself to God. He stands before him like the canvas before the painter or the marble before the sculptor. At the same time, he asks for his grace, exposes his needs, and those of his brothers in suffering. Generally, the patient who is cured is not praying for himself, but for another. Such a type of prayer demands complete renunciation. That is, a higher form of asceticism. The modest, the ignorant, and the poor are more capable of this self-denial than the rich and the intellectual. When it possesses such characteristics, prayer may set in motion a strange phenomenon, the miracle. That is Dr. Carrel. Now, let me read you from the diary of Sanford Dole, the former Pineapple King of Hawaii, whom few realized was inwardly a deeply spiritual man. He is writing on the subject of prayer. Doubtless, a great deal of doctrinal teaching of the time is a hindrance rather than a help to the spiritual life. It does not seem to me that anyone can talk to me dogmatically about God with any benefit. It is not an intellectual acquirement to know God, but it comes to use with great and inspiring force when we are in line with the great purpose and movement of the universe, which is God's activity, and which we may study, and so in some measure know God. It is perhaps not easy to believe that the events which we regard as the evils of life are in the line of universal purpose. I suppose that sin, scientifically considered, is resistance to the movement of this universal purpose or neglect to join in it. It is apropos these thoughts to refer to a text of the Bible which shows the way of progress. He that doeth my will shall know the doctrine, or words to that effect. Listen. Prayer in its highest exercise is an opening of the gates of the soul to the divine influence. The mere asking of favors from God is tiresome and discouraging. Prayer, as we know it in the infinite way, is an inner communion. It is an inner abiding in the spiritual law or spiritual presence. It is not a seeking of something. It is not a desire for something. It is not an attempt to get something. That is not prayer. Prayer is merely that inner quietness which comes from the assurance that there is a God. And therefore, as long as there's a God, there can be nothing wrong in the kingdom of God. Abiding in that inner assurance, a sense of peace envelops us. And that sense of peace dispels these pictures of sense. Now, I said before, we come to that state of prayer by some mental activity. That mental activity is consciously knowing the truth. So that, supposing, now that you know that the human mind can be used for both good and evil, and now that you know that there are people using the human mind both for good and evil, and now that you know that even those who aren't using it consciously for evil, merely by the nature of their sensuality or lust or greed, are sending out subliminal activities which are harmful. Now that you know this, it is your first responsibility in the message of the infinite way to protect yourself. And for that reason, in the July letter, I have asked our students to make a careful and prolonged study of Chapter 3 of Infinite Way Letters 1955, which is on protective work. Not to protect yourself from evil, for you will only get into the mess of having twice as much evil, but protecting yourself in the realization that the God mind is the only power, and that this mind of man, this mesmeric mind, mortal mind, carnal mind, is not power. The protective work that is often done in metaphysics is often harmful and dangerous, because the moment you acknowledge an evil to be protected from, you have made yourself the center of that evil. It is only in proportion as you understand that the world's concept of evil, the powers of this world, temporal powers, the fleshly mind or the arm of flesh, in proportion as you know that this can't be power if the mind of God is the only power. That is your protection. And not one of our students has any right to start their day without a conscious realization of the fact that the mind of God is the mind of man and is the only mind and the only power, and that which is called the devil, Satan, mortal mind, or carnal mind is not a power opposed to God. It's just not a power. Therefore, you need not fight it. You need not rise above it. You need not protect yourself from it. You need only consciously remember it's the arm of flesh, nothingness, and then rest in that word. Now, when you have done that, and you are completely at ease in the realization there are no evil powers, and such as are humanly experienced are only experienced because we have given them power, and now we understand their nothingness, now you can relax inside of yourself and commune. Not for any reason, no healing, no protection, not at all. Not at all. You might say, for the same reason for which you are in this room now. Why are you in this room now? Answer that to your own satisfaction. Why? Because in this room you know there is spiritual integrity, there is truth, there is the companionship of students who are devoting time, money, effort to the living in God, not to selfish purposes, not for self-aggrandizement, not for wealth, you know that everyone in this room is giving of money, time, effort for only one purpose, to know more about God, and therefore in this room you're safe, you're secure, to some extent you're in the very presence of God itself or himself, and you know it. And that's all you want out of this room, to be in a holy atmosphere. Well, that's the reason to go to God. Only to be in the household of God, in the consciousness of God, in the atmosphere of God. When you accomplish it, you will be able to say afterward, in his presence is fullness of joy. In his presence is fulfillment. Where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty. It won't be a quotation, it will be an experience which you have had. Just as all of these students who have come from so many far places can say to you that they have been in these classes before and found peace and harmony and love and to some extent health or supply. And that's why they're back again. Only to be in that atmosphere. You too will find that when you submit yourself to God for no other purpose than a few moments of resting in God, you will find that in attaining the presence of God, you have also attained liberty, freedom, justice, health, harmony, wholeness, peace, guidance, direction, all of these things that enable Paul to say, I live, yet not I. Christ liveth my life. Once you have attained the presence of God, you will not have to take conscious thought for what you shall eat or what you shall drink or wherewithal you shall be clothed. You will always find that this invisible presence has gone before you and prepared a way for you. And you will also prove that he that is within me is greater than he that is in the world. He performeth that which is given me to do. But remember that these are only quotations until that he has become a real experience. And it is for this reason, then, that our first step is consciously knowing the truth. I ask our students to go through those writings over and over and over until they know the nature of God. Know it so thoroughly that they'll never again turn to God for anything. That they'll never ask God for anything or expect God to step out of its orbit. Then, secondly, to know the nature of error, and to know it so thoroughly that you'll never fight it again, that you'll never argue against it, that you'll never war with it, but that regardless of what form it assumes, you will instantly recognize it as only the activity of the carnal mind. The clearest way to understand that is to understand that the ancients ascribed all evil to the devil. The devil was the source of all evil, and the devil acted as a tempter. Try to see it in that light, that there is an impersonal source of this evil. That impersonal source is the universal belief in good and evil. But it acts as an impersonal tempter, saying to you, believe in health and sickness, believe in accident and harmony, believe in life and death, believe in abundance and lack, believe in good and evil. And your only answer has to be no. No, now I know. The first commandment is truth. There is no other God but one. There is no other law but the law of God, which is a law of life eternal. Once you understand that and can keep away from that old Hebrew concept of God that rewards and punishes, that even calls you home to himself someday, and is even responsible for youngsters who pass on. Once you understand there is no such God, that God cannot act detrimentally to its own experience, that God cannot be destructive to his own creation, that God is the infinite, eternal life of all being and the law unto all being. And then you know that spiritual law even governs nature. Spiritual law governs weather. Spiritual law governs everything there is and brings it into harmony. But only when you have attained obedience to the first commandment, acknowledging no other power, no other law, no other presence, no other being, in spite of the fact that you're always going to be tempted by the devil to see sickness and sin, death, bad politics, man's inhumanity to man, and all the rest of these evils. It is the way in which you respond to these temptations that tells whether you're going to fall for the temptation or pass right by untouched. Now, in the message of the infinite way, we do not fight error. We do not call upon truth or God to overcome evil. We abide, as we would in the 23rd Psalm. The Lord is my shepherd, and that's the end, I shall not want. That's the end of the whole thing. The Lord is my shepherd, and that's all there is to it. There's no more fight. And even if I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for I know I can't die. It is an impossibility to die. And then our passing from this scene will be a progressive experience into a higher state of consciousness. Now, you see why it isn't necessary to give a treatment to anyone. It isn't necessary to correct them or improve them. It isn't necessary to tell them to be better or more loving or more gentle or more forgiving. It isn't necessary. As you consciously know the truth that you know becomes the law unto those within range of your consciousness. That is why you will find, first of all, that animal life is the most responsive life to this work. The dogs and the cats and the birds will respond to this virtually instantaneously. There is no resistance in them at all. Next to this is nature life, plant life, and so forth. It responds beautifully. And then children, adults are tough. And they've already learned to fear God. They've already learned to fear both God and devil. They've already learned about two powers. And they have to be reborn. They really have to be reborn before they can be childlike again. Until they can come in an absolute realization of why Jesus Christ disposed of 9 of the 10 commandments, outmoded them. He said there are only 2 commandments, and out of the 10 he only used 1. Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, with all thy soul, with all thy mind. Thou shalt love God. You can't love God without trusting God. You can't trust God without a firm realization of God as the one and only power. But when you have that, you are loving God supremely. Then he dug up another old Hebrew commandment which wasn't included in the 10 commandments and said, love thy neighbor as thyself. Well, once you have acknowledged God as the only power, you can't give power to evil. Therefore, you're compelled to love thy neighbor as thyself, because you can't introduce any evil into your relationship with your neighbor. Not once you have acknowledged God as the only power. So, If you understand the nature of God so that you can love God supremely, and love must carry confidence, trust, assurance, understanding, then of course it's an easy thing to love your neighbor, because all you have to do to love your neighbor is to know the truth, which is the truth about yourself. This is the truth about your neighbor. And this is loving your neighbor. And to understand that your neighbor is the child of God, whether or not he's appearing as friend or enemy. That's the difficult part. You have to carry through with Jesus Christ. And when he says, it profiteth you nothing to pray for your friends, he's giving you a terrific statement. And when he says that you have to pray for your enemies in order to become the children of God, it means just that one thing, that your prayers, which are not, of course, that your enemies prosper, but that your prayers are the realization of God as the very heart and soul and mind of that individual now appearing to you as an enemy and who later becomes your friend. So we will not treat anybody, whether they ask for it or they don't ask for it. But we will always consciously know the truth, and eventually we will pray. And we will remain in prayer. Even when we are in conversation, even when we are about the activity of business, there will be a center of consciousness within us, a little area that's always reserved for being in prayer, regardless of what the rest of us is doing. It makes no difference. We can suffer it to be so now. We can do all of the things of this world, but we can always have one area in consciousness where, regardless of appearances, we're smiling in the realization that God constitutes individual being. God is the substance of this universe. God is the only law of this universe, and that is a spiritual law of good. And we can be doing that regardless of whatever other activity the mind and body is going through. You mentioned none has ever died. Please explain. To die means to become extinct. And so what I've said is that nobody ever becomes extinct. We pass from experience to experience, but we are always actively and consciously doing it. In this, too, I speak to you from experience. I have witnessed many times those who have passed from sight. And in every case, an identical experience took place, and that is that the individual, for a short while, was suspended above their bodies. Their body was where it was, but they were suspended here. And this, too, I know, through experience, that at that point they have a choice of going on or returning. And when the occasion requires it, such as often a mother with a family that she cannot feel right about leaving, that she will return. And sometimes it's called a miraculous healing. She chose to return. Sometimes a man with family responsibilities who cannot leave his family, who just feels the horror of leaving them unprotected, unsupplied, will return to fulfill that function. But mostly, people will not return because they do not reach that estate until really they are ready for it and have desired it. And that is the reason they do not return. They do not even experience it until they themselves are ready for it, except in the case of violence, accidents, and things of that kind. Now, we never die. If I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will be there. And if I leave this plane of consciousness, I will be leaving it. and I will be conscious of it. I will never be other than I, nor will I ever be unaware of my I-ness, of my identity, of my selfhood. This I is an indestructible oneness with God that was coexistent with God in the beginning and will be with God until the end. Therefore, even those who leave on the human plane continue an afterlife which is just as human as this one until they evolve. We have the choice, we who are here, to continue to evolve spiritually so that when we leave this plane we will not live as humans but will be living as divine beings. But those who do not mature spiritually still continue to live mentally and even physically. And they have the same opportunity as we have and have always had. Any day in the week, any month in the year, everyone on earth is given the opportunity to turn to spiritual living. They may not be aware of it, but the opportunity is there just as it has been for us, and we've accepted it. So that as we leave this plane, we find ourselves still living and in some measure further advanced for having left here. But never forget that you cannot get away from yourself. That is why so many people go on vacations and do not benefit by them, and go away for a rest and take a trip around the world. They had to take themselves with them, and it was themselves that caused the trouble. It isn't going to cure it just by putting themselves in another place. We witness that here in Hawaii. I'm sure that all of you visitors must know what a beautiful place this is. The harmony, the joy, the beauty, the atmosphere, the love, the aloha. You're all aware of it all around you. And so it must surprise you if I say to you that there is just as much unhappiness here, just as much poverty, just as much sin, just as much disease as other places. Because they bring it with them. It is themselves. And there are loads of people who find no beauty in Hawaii, who are here merely because they have to be, and are glad to get away. It isn't the place that makes any difference. It's the state of consciousness you bring to the place. And so when you leave this plane, you will find the next plane to be what you bring to it. But don't think for a minute that you will ever bring extinction or unconsciousness, for there is no such thing. That would be then God, infinite life, being death, consciousness becoming unconsciousness. There is no such thing. Do we ever meet our loved ones again? We do if we want to and if they want us to. It is the same life there as here. We have relatives right here whom we never meet, and sometimes don't want to. And I don't see any reason to meet them after either. But if I have anyone in my heart and in my soul here, I can assure you they're going to be right with me on my travels. Whether I'm on the road or whether I pass to another existence, I will never let them get out of my heart and soul and mind. Why should I if I love them? And if they love me, then there is a mutuality which means that we can never be separated. So be it here or hereafter, we will be together. But the mere fact that they are blood relatives doesn't ensure it. Not any more than we want them all around us here. Will you please say something about parenthood? Now, this is a very difficult subject for me. I have only been a parent by proxy. And I don't have the feelings that most parents do have for children. I don't know that kind of a sensation. And so I can't speak about it. I love children and they love me, but it has nothing to do with that emotion of love that is ordinarily felt by parents for their children or children for their parents. It is of a different nature. A child, to me, is very much like a bud, a blossom. It is new and fresh and has infinite potentialities. And it can be molded. Not molded to my will. Too often it is molded to the will of its parents. But sometimes unfortunately so. But it can be spiritually molded. I don't know whether parents can do that. Some can, because I've seen it done. But how many can, I don't know, because what I see of parenthood, it is much too much of just an animal emotion. And it doesn't permit the parent to be objective or to see their child spiritually. To see the child spiritually means to understand the child not as your child, but as a child of God. As another of the infinite forms and varieties of God being sent to earth with all the potentialities of God being. If one can see their child that way, and as I say, never having been a parent, I don't know. But I have known some parents who could, some few. To be able to love a child that way, to understand that its nature came forth from God, that it was sent to this plane of consciousness not to be anybody's child, but to be an instrument for good on earth, just as much of an instrument as Jesus Christ was an instrument, or Moses or Buddha. Every child is that potentiality. Now, to understand that that child is not limited mentally by its parents or grandparents or great-grandparents, since it is the offspring of God and its mind is God and its source of intelligence and wisdom is God, is to free that child from the limitations of family relationships. In the same way, to be able to raise a child without making it fear to cross the street, fear to talk to a stranger, fear to go swimming, fear to this, but rather with a spiritual understanding of releasing it into God. There again, parenthood at that level is quite a different thing than human parenthood. Human parenthood is a selfish emotion, almost entirely selfish. And one has to rise far above that in order to be able to see that we are the caretakers of children. We are their providers until such time as they can take over that responsibility. We are their guides. And to be able to do it spiritually means to do it through inner communion with God. It doesn't mean to be a dominating person, dictating to them out of your human knowledge what they should do or should not do, but it means rather to raise them with a minimum amount of talk and conversation and a maximum amount of holding him in that inner communion with the Spirit and permitting them to be God-governed instead of man-dominated. Now, I can't speak about human parenthood because it is presented to the world through so many different angles that I feel the same way about that as I do about world peace. I don't believe it'll ever be accomplished humanly. It can't be. It will have to come through spiritual means. And so I don't believe that there is going to ever be a way of raising children found humanly that is going to bring them forth into their rightful heritage. Therefore, for us in this work, the only way we have of bringing up children, the only way we have of giving them their freedom, is to give them the Spirit of God, to give them prayer, to give them communion, to hold them fast in that relationship, and to continually teach them the nature of these worldly evils, so that in recognizing them, they have no temptation to fall into their way. Now, I have known children who, at the age of 16, when asked to go out and get some aspirin for a visitor, said, "What is aspirin? I never heard of it." I hadn't even seen an ad for it. It hadn't come into their awareness. They had been so brought up in the spiritual life. They wouldn't even know the purpose of an aspirin or any other form of medicine. I've seen that. I've witnessed over and over again homes that have gone for 15, 18, and 20 years without knowing anything in the nature of serious illness or accident or anything of that kind, merely because the parents were holding that household and that family in spiritual realization. Now, it can be done. It can be done in the same way that a practitioner can hold their patient body, whether it's 20 patients or 50 or 100, can keep them almost immune from the world's discords. A teacher can hold an entire student body relatively free for long periods of time, more especially if there is any cooperation on their part. Why? The higher consciousness lifts the lower consciousness to its level. I, if I be lifted up, shall draw all men unto me. And as I am lifted up in this consciousness, knowing the nature of God and the nature of error, and abiding in this God consciousness, all those, or most of those, who are abiding with me, rise in some level of demonstration, in better health, and better supply, and better human relationships. Not all alike, certainly, and not all to the same degree, certainly not. But tremendously if they themselves are working with me in the understanding and in the practice and demonstration of this principle. The only reason we are not wholly immune from the world's discords is that this universal mesmerism is a very strong belief in this world, and you have to live on a tremendously high level, probably higher than any one of us have ever been able to live, in order to be completely immune. Our blessing is that when we do occasionally fall by the wayside, we have something with which to pick ourselves up and others. Well, looks to me like there's going to be more to talk about, and I thought I was all talked out. I just want a minute of summary. There wouldn't be a trace of discord in this world of any nature if it weren't for this impersonal mesmerism that has evolved out of the belief of good and evil, and because we are born on that level, we are receptive and responsive to that influence, and therefore some of us become sinful, and others become sick, and others become poor. There is a way of nullifying nearly all of the world's discords, most of them entirely, the rest of them in some degree, through our own conscious realization of the nature of God, the nature of the evil, and nothingizing this whole hypnotic mind or mortal mind or carnal mind, and realizing that since it is not of God's creating, since it is not endowed by God, it has no law of God to maintain it or sustain it. Living in that consciousness will not only free us, but it will so completely put us at peace that we can attain this inner communion with God. There's nothing separating anyone from this inner communion with God except the turmoil of the mind. The mind won't let us rest long enough. It won't stop long enough to let us get quiet inside. It's always in a turmoil about something or other. But this enables us to become quiet. The ability always to have that faith, that understanding in God, that enables us to say, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want, and drop it there. And the ability to realize, I know the world is full of appearances. 1,000 are falling at my side and 10,000 at the other side. But I'm realizing that none of these evils are power. They are the emanation of the fleshly mind, the arm of flesh, nothingness. Then you're at such peace that you can settle down inside and enjoy a communion with God. When this takes place repeatedly, then comes this, I call it more or less, permanent state of consciousness, in which you are never entirely outside the atmosphere of God, and when on some occasions you are, it is only in a slight degree. Never, never after the experience are you entirely separated, even for a moment, from God. There come momentary disturbances, and it would seem in those moments that you are separated from God, but you're not very far away. Not very far away. You never do again get very far away. Thank you. Until tomorrow night.